course, anybody can unmute themselves if you have a question, or when we're doing the Q&A, just try to remember to mute yourself again.
happy Tuesday evening to you. This is an amateur radio class. If you stumbled across us by watching on YouTube, this is an upgrade class for folks who already have their general or advanced class amateur radio license in the United States and want to upgrade to the top level, the pinnacle, the extra class. And you get your upgrade by passing a multiple choice test of 50 questions, and we review the questions and answers here in this class each week and get you prepared to take your test sometime in December. Our goal is extra by Christmas. So that's what we're going to do. This is chapter 3 tonight, and when I say that, I always like to show the book. This is the extra class license manual from the American Radio Relay League. It's the 13th edition. It's a pretty thick book, as you can see. In the back are all of the questions and all of the answers, and we go chapter by chapter, or in some cases we split the chapter in half and cover part 1, part 2, so that we make sure that we cover all of the test questions that are involved. So I'm Gary, your instructor tonight, ham radio call sign Whiskey 4 Echo Echo Yankee. And we're going to go through chapter 3 in the first half of class tonight. Then we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back, and I'm trying to lobby to get David to rename this Learning to Learn Better. Because, okay, we all know how to learn, kinda, but if we could do it better, maybe we could retain some of the stuff we talk about. So tonight is everybody's favorite, rules and regulations. And as we go through tonight, we'll be looking at the band chart, because as extra class operators, extra class folks get to use all of the amateur radio frequencies. We get exclusive access to certain frequency ranges. You can see them listed here. It's a total of 250 kilohertz of additional space that amateur extras are allowed to use on the high frequency bands. And those are very important frequency ranges, because that's where the DX lives. The rare stations will sometimes come up on the air in the extra class portion. It's really frustrating for generals and advanced class if that happens, because legally they can't operate in that range. So getting your extra class allows you to use all of the frequencies. You don't have to pay attention so much to where the band edge, where's my operating edge. If you want to get a chart like this, you can go to the American Radio Relay League URL here, and you can download PDF versions of this chart. Or if you'd like to get the one that I'm holding now, it's not laminated, I keep saying that. It's glossy, you can see it sparkling there. It also has a map on the back if I hold it right side up. And 8.5 by 11, this is the only size I have. But if you'd like to, send me an email to w4eey@arrl.net. There it is. w4eey@arrl.net, and say, Gary, I'd like to get one of those color charts. We call it the color chart. And I'd be happy. Oh, and give me your mailing address. Send me your mailing address, and I'll put one in the mail to you the next day. All right. So let's get started. So this seems kind of like a basic question, but if we have a radio, here's a Kenwood, and we have an indicated frequency, and if you can look, let me turn on my laser pointer here. Real close, if you have your glasses on, you can see it says USB right there. Well, what is 14.2? What does that mean? Well, what it means is, remember that single sideband signals, it's a kind of AM signal where we've eliminated one of the sidebands and the carrier. But the frequency readout on your radio is the frequency of where the carrier would be if there was a carrier. So upper sideband signals are about 3 kilohertz wide. So this is telling us that the lowest part of your transmitted signal is going to be on 14.2, and the highest frequency that it's going to be transmitting on is 3 kilohertz above that. Flex radios have a display that looks like this, and you can see their slice here, which is kind of like what they call a VFO. In this case, it's 14.183, but again, here, this is what the radio is tuned to. This is with a 14.183. This is upper sideband, this looks like a data signal because it's so flat. And so here's the lowest part of transmitted emissions, and here's the highest part of a transmitted emission. We need to know our signals and we need to know our radios. AM transmission, as I mentioned, normally has a carrier and a lower sideband and an upper sideband. Single sideband is a special case where we suppress one of those sidebands in the carrier, and we say that single sideband bandwidth is about 3 kilohertz. So for lower sideband, the indicated frequency is going to be 3 kilohertz. For signals, we want to avoid the band edges. So for lower sideband, we want to stay 3 kilohertz above the lower band limit, as indicated on the color chart, or upper sideband 3 kilohertz below the upper band limit. We want to be aware of the band edges. So here we are, we're on 20 meter single sideband, assuming you have a properly adjusted transmitter. How close could you set your dial to the upper band limit? Well, if you look at the color chart, the top end of the 20 meter band is 14,350. And so we go down 3 kilohertz because it's an upper sideband signal. And so legally, the highest we can transmit in the 20 meter band for single sideband would be 14,347. Take a look at this. This was in a contest. I don't remember which contest, CQ Worldwide or whatever. I just grabbed my phone and took a picture. So here's 14,350 right there, all right? And so theoretically, you know, we got to be down in here transmitting. This would be a legal signal, no problem. But look here. This was a French station that was calling CQ contest on the 20 meter band, well, above the 20 meter band, and there were Americans coming back to him. This is the time when I tried to call him back and my radio wouldn't let me, because my radio, a Flex 6600, was smarter than I was. It wouldn't let me make an out-of-band transmission. But that's what we want to keep in mind. And so single sideband, 3 kilohertz bandwidth. Radio teletype is a popular mode. We say that a signal for radio teletype has a 1 kilohertz bandwidth. So we need to keep that in mind, and the signal edges are measured at the minus 26 dB points. That's a standard. You'll see that again here. And we must stay within the allotted band segments for the mode being used. And here's something to keep in mind. Radio teletype, by convention, uses band if you were using audio frequency shift keying. Whereas data signals, including the very popular FT8, by convention use upper sideband. So keep that in mind. We say that radio teletype has a bandwidth of 1 kilohertz. We say that data signals typically have a bandwidth of about 2.8 kilohertz. So here's some examples for 17 meters. The lowest band edge is 18.068. So for radio teletype on lower sideband, the lowest indicated frequency that we could have and be legal is 18.069, 1 kilohertz up from the lower band edge. A data signal, we say, is a 2.8 kilohertz wide. Well, here they're assuming a 1 kilohertz bandwidth. Sorry about that. Anyway, we want to make sure that we avoid the band edges. That's what we're trying to imply here on all of this. So, all right, well, I'm just going to do Morse code because that's only on one frequency, right? No, Morse code has a bandwidth as well. It's not very wide, maybe about 200 hertz wide. Basics of your radio, how fast you're sending, the rise and fall times of your keying wave. The occupied bandwidth, as we mentioned before, is at the minus 26 dB points. That's a standard for both amateur and commercial radio. Here, for example, is a Wi-Fi access point, and you'll see they're making the measurements of bandwidth at the minus 26 dB point. So this is a typical standard. We're moving right along. This chapter has a lot of different things. The 60-meter band, if you look at the color chart, is the only channelized high-frequency band that we have. We're secondary to other services in this band, so we must tolerate interference from other users. Maximum of 100 watts effective radiated power using a dipole antenna. All that's in the fine print there on the color chart. You can only use upper sideband phone with a 2.8 kilohertz maximum bandwidth. And for Morse code, the CW frequency is the center of that channel. So that's where you want to set your dial for Morse code operation, is the center of the channel. Radio teletype also must be centered to the channel. 5 designated channels. They may be in your radio, or you may have to set up special memory channels on some radios in order to operate on this 60-meter band. And here they are, and the indicated frequencies. So moving right along, on the 20-meter band, there are some mode restrictions. Data is only allowed up to 14.150 megahertz. And we mentioned, you heard me say before, that the typical data bandwidth is maximum 2.8 kilohertz. And knowing that, then you could say that the highest indicated carrier frequency that you could have on your radio dial to be legal with upper sideband data would be 14.1472 megahertz. A lot of math there. All right. This is fun. How low can you go? If you look on the color chart, the very lowest bands that we have are the 2200 meter bands and the 630 meter bands. And a pioneer on these bands is local to us here, David Day, N1DAY, up in Hendersonville. He's a member of the North Carolina DX and Contesting Club, where I've been a member in the past and got a chance to meet him and hear one of his presentations. Here's his QRZ page where information about. These are really interesting bands. They're very, very low frequency. The antennas are short and low. This is one of the antennas. Because of the way that they have to wind the antennas, high voltages will be involved. Antenna tuning is, I call it, interesting. It's difficult. The maximum power for the 2200 meter band is just 1 watt effective radiated power relative to an isotropic antenna. Whereas the 630 meter band, you can go up to a whole 5 watts. Before you consider to operate on either of these two bands, and I wouldn't recommend it as your first out of the gate because they're very difficult to operate on, but you need to actually read the fine print on the color chart, that print there in the yellow. You actually need to go online to the URL that we have here and apply to the United Technologies Council and indicate to them your latitude and longitude and that you intend to operate on one or both of these bands. The reason being is that this council, the power companies utilize switching along their network of power lines, and some of their network switching operates in these frequency bands and can be impacted by amateur operation in these bands. So you need to check with them first. They'll make sure that there's nothing in the area where you are that could be interfered with, and then they'll give you authorization. And there is a 30-day waiting period. Monty Python, anyone? Auto message forwarding. Remember, rules and regulations. These are all the things that they kind of expect us to know. All hams are responsible for messages originating from their station. If you have a repeater system or a data forwarding system or whatnot, and you forward a message that is illegal, immoral, or something like that, you must stop the forwarding of an unlawful message if you have a message relay system. But it's really the originating hams that have the ultimate responsibility for any message that might be sent using amateur radio. Again, here we go. RACES, the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. It's set out in the Rules and Regulations for Amateur Radio, Part 97.407. It's involved in civil defense. And you must be certified by your local civil defense organization to participate in RACES. Then you'll be issued an authorization card. RACES uses amateur frequencies. You don't get any special frequencies, and you operate according to your license privileges. So the extra class operator can operate on any of the frequencies. If you have a general class license, you may be restricted in some of the frequencies that you could operate. No special call signs are issued. I found this interesting. They're under FEMA guidance. I didn't really know that, and they do have regular training. That's RACES. Moving on along, shipboard and air mobile stations. If you're going to be operating maritime mobile, it's suggested that you append stroke MM for maritime mobile to your call sign. So it would be Whiskey 4 Echo Echo Yankee stroke MM. Or what's kind of fun, you'll sometimes hear this on the 20-meter band. You'll hear somebody Whiskey 4 Echo Echo Yankee stroke aeronautical mobile. Could be a pilot of a private plane, or even the commercial pilots. A lot of them are hams as well. If you want to operate on a ship or on an airplane, the operation and installation must be approved by the ship's captain or the pilot in command. You cannot get on a commercial flight with your HT and up at 10,000 feet, key up repeaters down below. That is not approved. The station, if you are going to operate on one of these, must be separate from other radio apparatus normally used on the vessel, and you only need to be an FCC licensed ham, but you must follow the rules of the ITU region or country of jurisdiction. So if you're on international waters, then you can, and you're in ITU Zone 2, well, okay, you're fine, you use the US rules. But if you're in ITU Zone 1 toward Europe and Africa, then you may have some other frequency limitations that are going to come upon you. That was a lot. That was a mishmash, and there's more mishmash to come, but we're up to questions. So let's go ahead, and you can go ahead and unmute. Remember our 3-second rule, please. If you would read the question, I'll read it out for our visually impaired friends, and then tell me what you think the right answer would be. So here's our first question. Why is it not legal to transmit a 3 kilohertz bandwidth USB signal with a carrier frequency of 14.348 megahertz?
Delta.
It is delta. The upper 1 kilohertz of the signal is outside the 20-meter band. And when using a transceiver that displays the carrier frequency of phone signals, which of the following displayed frequencies represent the lowest frequency at which a properly adjusted lower sideband emission will totally be within the band?
E-delta?
E-delta.
Yet 3 kilohertz above the lower band edge. And remember, these are the actual questions and actual answers that you will see on your test, just the answers will not be in the same order. So do not memorize A, B, C, or D. It won't do you any good. So what is the highest legal carrier frequency on the 20-meter band for transmitting a 2.8 kilohertz wide USB data signal?
Charlie.
See, Charlie.
Yeah, that was the 14.1472 megahertz. And may an extra class operator answer the CQ of a station on 3.601 megahertz lower sideband phone?
See, Charlie.
Correct. No, the sideband components will extend beyond the edge of the phone band segment. Remember, some other countries don't have the same limitations that we do. They may have the ability to transmit there where we cannot. So who must be in physical control of the station apparatus of an amateur station aboard any vessel documented or registered in the United States? Who must be in physical control?
C, Charlie.
C, Charlie.
Any person holding an FCC-issued amateur license or who is authorized for alien reciprocal operation. So what is the required transmit frequency of a CW signal for channelized 60-meter operation?
B, Bravo.
B, Bravo.
Yeah, you put it at the center frequency of the channel. And what is the maximum power permitted on the 2200 meter band?
C, Charlie.
Charlie.
1 watt. And if a station in a message forwarding system inadvertently forwards a message that is in violation of FCC rules, who is accountable primarily?
B, Bravo.
B, Bravo.
Primarily accountable is the control operator of the originating station. If it's your relay system, though, you must stop forwarding it. Except in some parts of Alaska, what is the maximum power permitted on the 630 meter band?
D, Delta.
B, Charlie.
Not Charlie.
Delta.
D delta,
Delta.
5 watts. Yeah, the other 2,200 meters was 1 watt, 630 meters, 5 watts maximum power. If an amateur station is installed aboard a ship or aircraft, what condition must be met before the station is operated?
Alpha.
Yeah, the pilot in command or the ship's captain must approve. So you can't get on a cruise ship with your ham radio and expect you're going to operate. You will not be allowed, I can tell you. So what licensing is required when operating an amateur station aboard a U.S. registered vessel in international waters?
Bravo.
In this case, any FCC-issued amateur license. And which amateur stations may be operated under RACES rules?
Charlie.
C, Charlie.
You have to be a licensed amateur and you have to be certified by a local civil defense organization. And what frequencies are authorized to an amateur station operating under RACES rules?
A,
A,
Alpha.
Alpha.
Yeah, there's no change. It's whatever your class of license. All amateur service frequencies authorized to the control operator. You don't get any new authorizations. And what is the maximum bandwidth for a data emission on 60 meters?
D delta.
Delta.
That's,
Delta.
yep, 2.8 kilohertz. And how long must an operator wait after filing a notification with the United Technology Council before operating on the 2200 or 630 meter bands?
Bravo.
30 days. You have to wait. You may operate after 30 days unless you've been told you can't. And what notifications must be given before transmitting on the 630 and 2200 meter bands?
D delta.
Yeah, you won't get both of these questions, but operators must inform the Utilities Technology Council at that website of their call sign and the coordinates of the station to obtain approval. And in what portion of the 630 meter band are phone emissions permitted? Might have to look at the color chart.
D, Delta.
D, Delta.
Yeah, the entire band is available. It's going to be difficult to do, but if you can do it, great. All right, section 3.2, station restrictions. We're going to start off with talking about interference coming from you. So your transmitted signal should contain modulation products necessary to convey the signal, but nothing more. It should be free from harmonic output. So if you're transmitting a 7 megahertz signal, there shouldn't be a second harmonic signal at 14 megahertz. It should be free of spurious emissions being generated in the modulation process. It should occupy an appropriate bandwidth of frequencies. And this is a general rule, uses only the output power necessary to make the contact. There's been a lot of work on amateur radio transceivers to improve their reception capabilities, and manufacturers are now beginning to look at the transmit side. And kudos out to these folks at Anon. They have something they call their Clean Signal Initiative. Flex Radio has Smart Signal. And ICOM is doing something called DPD, or Digital Pre-Distortion. And so if you look at the photos down here below on the left, you can see this signal at 14,250 you see these wings coming out here on the waterfall display. That's a spurious product. It's coming from the modulation of this signal, probably going through a linear amplifier. Here, look, there's no wings. There's nothing on the lower frequency areas or the upper frequency areas. This is the result of digital pre-distortion on an ICOM. So it's something to, when you're thinking about a new radio, this is something that you help yourself, you help others by having the cleanest signal possible, so that we can all enjoy the bands at the same time. Now, when we're talking about interference from ham radio stations, your neighbor's not going to care about that. They're going to care about something like this, which is likely from front-end overload on their TV set. When you transmit, the TV just can't handle it, even though it's nowhere near the frequency range of the TV signal. And you want to avoid this, but interference, we were commenting that we're about 100 years into the radio game. The 1920s was when broadcasting got started. And interference is not new. And some of the regulations regarding interference go back to this time frame. And if you're found to be interfering with normal broadcast operations, the FCC can impose what they call quiet hours. And quiet hours are between 8 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. and on Sundays between 10:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. The network broadcasts during the week and the church service on Sunday. In these cases, the receiver must be of good engineering design. Radio receivers or other receivers have gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to make, and less filtered, so that may never be the case anymore. And you're not transmitting excessive spurious emissions, and the standard is 43 dB below the average of the fundamental power. It's a factor of about 31,000 less. And here's the definition of, of spurious emissions. Unwanted emissions that may occur outside the necessary bandwidth. And you can take a look here. Power amplifiers, if they're going to get type acceptance from the FCC, if it's a commercial product, spurious emissions must be at least, here's 43 dB, below the mean power output, the average power output of the carrier signal, 43 dB. Moving on. Restrictions on station location. These are the things that hams typically have to deal with. Agreements, deeds, covenants, local zoning, your HOA, that may have a restriction on what you can do. Locations of environmental importance or significant historical or cultural, thinking downtown Charleston here in South Carolina. If you're going to put a ham antenna up outside, well, you may need to submit an environmental assessment to the FCC before you're allowed to do that. And if you happen to be near an FCC monitoring station, the closest to us is in Powder Springs, Georgia. If you're within 1 mile, well, you must maybe get some additional permissions. Probably not going to be allowed to transmit within 1 mile of an FCC monitoring station. Antenna structures and towers. Towers cannot be more than 200 feet high without FCC approval. If you're near a public use airport, there may be additional height restrictions and lighting requirements. Antenna heights of less than 20 feet, no restrictions or approval are required. There is a law that was passed. It's a memorandum opinion and order. Actually, it's an FCC memorandum. It's called PRB1. It's not a legislated law, but it's an FCC rule intended to give local zoning authorities guidance in developing ordinances. And in PRB1, it directs local governments that amateur radio should be reasonably accommodated. So if you tell the local council that you need to have a 20-meter antenna up about 50 feet in the air in order for the antenna to properly form the beam that goes out from the antenna, that's something that a technical reason why you need a 50-foot tower. PRB1 does not address HOA covenants and restrictions, but it does give guidance to local government and government zoning ordinances. And there's a URL down there at the bottom. All right, questions? Which of the following constitutes a spurious emission? I heard a delta. Do you get that?
Delta.
Yeah, it's an emission outside the signal's necessary bandwidth that can be reduced or eliminated without affecting the information transmitted. All of those, the DPD signals from the ICOMs, all exact information is being transmitted just without the spurious stuff. All right, within what distance must an amateur station protect an FCC monitoring facility?
Alpha.
Yeah, alpha 1 mile. And which of the following additional rules apply if you're using or erecting an amateur station antenna at a site near a public use airport?
Alpha.
Alpha.
It is alpha. You may have to notify the FAA and register it with the FCC. It's required in Part 17 of the FCC rules. And to what type of regulations does PRB1 apply?
C, Charlie.
Charlie.
State and local zoning. And what limitations may the FCC place on an amateur station if its signal causes interference to broadcast reception, assuming that the receivers are in good engineering design?
Delta.
Yeah, quiet hours. The amateur station must avoid transmitting during certain hours on frequencies that cause the interference. And what does PRB1 require of state and local regulations affecting amateur radio?
Bravo.
Bravo.
The key phrase is reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodations of amateur radio must be made. And what is the maximum mean power level for a spurious emission below 30 megahertz with respect to the fundamental emission? How low do we have to be?
Alpha.
A alpha.
Yeah, minus
Alpha.
43 dB down. Moving right along, station control. This is kind of nebulous, but local control is where you have a control operator, a licensed amateur radio operator, who directly manipulates the operating adjustments. Remote control is where you have a licensed amateur radio operator, a control operator, who indirectly manipulates the operating adjustments. So local control is where you're at the transmitter site. Remote control might be where you're controlling the same station, but maybe over the internet at a distance. Automatic control is what radio repeaters use. It's the use of devices and procedures for the control of a station when it is transmitting, so that compliance is achieved without a control operator being present at the control point. This also applies to auxiliary and beacon stations. So local control, remote control, but where is the control point? And the answer is where the control operator is located is the control point. So it could be at the station, or if you're controlling it on your smartphone, it could be at the smartphone. If you are going to be operating a remote control station, the rule is that if your link to that station fails, there must be some sort of control to limit transmissions to no more than 3 minutes, called a watchdog timer. Remember, repeaters are under automatic control, and automatically controlled stations may only relay emissions. They're never allowed to originate messages, which is why if you go to a repeater site, you'll never see a microphone plugged into the radio repeater, because repeaters cannot originate, they can only relay. Automatically controlled stations, APRS digipeaters, for example, they may carry third-party traffic if it's data, text messages, that sort of thing, or radio teletype. controlling devices via radio is done by telecommands. Telecommands are one-way transmissions to control, modify, or terminate functions, like in radio-controlled aircraft or in controlling satellites up into space. So that's a telecommand. Telemetry is a one-way transmission of data coming from a distance. So you may get telemetry downlinks coming from a satellite, for example. Do you have plans to put a balloon up in the air? Well, here's the W4EEY balloon. It's got sensors aboard for temperature and pressure and recorders, and it's also going to be linking telemetry back down. And the call sign, my call sign, is required on the balloon-borne telemetry transmissions. So when the system is sending the telemetry back, it has to have my call sign. Also on board the balloon, I'm not there, there must be a photocopy of the station license, a label with the name, address, and phone number of the station licensee, and a label with the name, address, and phone number of the control operator. Radio control, anybody? For amateur radio operators, the maximum output power is 1 watt, which might not sound like a lot, except the commercial off-the-shelf stuff you buy without using a license is 100 milliwatts. So 10 times more powerful if you can use your amateur radio license. Oh, more questions. So under what situation may a station transmit third-party communications while being automatically controlled?
Bravo.
Yeah, when transmitting radio teletype or data. And what is the maximum permissible duration of remotely controlled station's transmission if its control link malfunctions?
Bravo.
Bravo.
Yep, 3 minutes. That's the watchdog timer. Nowadays, we control stations remotely over the internet, but it used to be you'd have UHF or VHF links, and if they went down, then you had to have this. So what is the definition of telemetry?
Alpha? A alpha.
Yes, it's one-way transmission of measurements at a distance from the measuring instrument. And which of the following is required in the identification transmissions from a balloon-borne telemetry station?
Alpha.
It's, yes, sending all this data back along with the call sign of the amateur radio control operator. And what must be posted at the location of a station being operated by telecommand on or within 50 kilometers of the Earth's surface?
Delta.
Yeah, photocopy of the station license, a label with the name of the station licensee, a label with the name, address, and telephone number of the control operator, the balloon we were talking about. All right, and what is the maximum permitted transmitter output power when operating model craft by telecommand?
Alpha.
1 watt. And which of the following amateur stations may transmit one-way communications?
A alpha.
Bravo. Bravo.
No, it is A. So a local repeater is relaying, but a space station or a beacon station or a telecommand station is transmitting in one-way signals. We're thinking about satellite telemetry here when we talk about space station. All right.
The signal under A could be retransmitted under B, yes?
Well, yeah, potentially, I suppose. But we think about repeaters more for VHF, UHF voice communications, and a little bit of APRS data. Those are the kind of repeaters that are mostly involved. All right, let's move on. Amateur satellite service. And you think, well, am I going to get involved in satellites? Well, there are people who want to work DXCC. We were talking about DXCC before we got started here tonight. It's where you work 100 countries. And if you're going to work 100 countries on the 2-meter band, the only way you're going to do it is if you bounce signals off the moon. Because there's no way you can do direct line of sight on 2 meters to 100 countries around the United States. But bouncing signals off the moon, you could do it. So if you're going to get involved in amateur satellite and space activities, you need to know about AMSAT. AMSAT has been around for a good long period of time, and it's an extraordinary history of amateur radio satellites that they have put up and administered. The URL is there in the orange box, so check them out. So the amateur satellite service is a communication service using amateur radio stations on satellites. Many satellites have transponders that act like repeaters, although they retransmit entire bands of frequencies through transponders. Modes that are used are packet, FM, single sideband, or CW. And other satellites are used for scientific or educational purposes and send telemetry back down to Earth. So some definitions. An Earth station is an amateur station engaging in satellite communications that is on or within 50 kilometers of the Earth's surface. So no higher than 50 kilometers. So you could have an Earth station in a plane, I guess. All right. Space station is above 50 kilometers. It's an amateur station more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And a telecommand is a one-way transmission to initiate, modify, or terminate functions, in this case, of a space station. So a telecommand station is an amateur station that transmits communications to initiate, modify, or terminate functions of a space station or a satellite. And this is kind of repeating, but telemetry is a one-way transmission of measurements back to a receiver at a distance from the measuring instrument. So satellites are one of those unique cases where encryption is allowed. Telecommands and telemetry to and from a space station may be encrypted. And the reason being is that they don't want somebody to hijack that satellite for nefarious tasks or whatever else. So encryption is allowed. And radio control commands, if you're doing radio control for your models and whatnot, those also may be encrypted for the same reason. Those are the two exceptions. Otherwise, amateur radio transmissions must be unencrypted. So satellite licensing and frequency privileges, well, no special licensing is necessary to be a control operator of a space station. Any ham could be a telecommand station, but you have to be authorized by whoever has the satellite, the space station licensee. And they are not going to give you the keys to the kingdom without knowing a lot of things about you. So, and the FCC requires that there's a telecommand capability to turn off the space station should it go rogue, for example, and send data willy-nilly and interfere with other services. You've got to be able to shut it down. Anybody old enough to remember Sputnik? You got to be really old. That was the first satellite that the Russians, Soviet Union, put up into space, and it was operating on a frequency very near 20 megahertz, very near the 15-meter band of amateur radio operators. And so space stations do technically have the authority to operate on high frequencies, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters. 40, 20, 15, and 10 could be used. Now, they're not. Only 10 meters is occasionally used. But what I want you to remember are 4 bands, not 30. The answer to this got changed, and this is not so necessary anymore, but it was a confusing thing in previous question pools. But 40, 20, 15, and 10, 4 bands, not 30 meters. Most amateur radio satellites operate VHF and UHF with a little bit of L-band, 13 centimeters. And you may have a 2-meter uplink and a 70-centimeter downlink, or it may be flipped. That first would be mode VU, or it may be mode UV, where you're up on UHF and down on VHF. More questions? So which of the following may transmit encrypted messages?
B, Bravo.
Bravo.
Yeah, telecommand signals from a space telecommand station. And what is a space telecommand station?
Alpha.
Not Alpha.
Bravo.
It is Bravo. It's an amateur station, and this is the transmit communications to, here's the initiate, modify, or terminate. Initiate, modify, or terminate functions of a space station. And which of the following HF amateur bands include allocations for space stations?
A, Alpha.
Alpha.
4 bands, not 30. Yeah, so they're 40, 20, 15, and 10. And which VHF amateur bands have frequencies authorized for space stations?
D, Delta.
Just 2 meters, yes. And which UHF amateur bands have frequency authorized for space stations?
Alpha.
Alpha is true, but also they use L band as well. So it's yeah, 70 centimeters and 13 centimeters. And which amateur stations are eligible to be telecommand stations of space stations, subject to the privileges of the class of operator license held by the control operator?
B, Bravo.
Yeah, any amateur station so designated by the licensee of the space station. And which amateur stations are eligible to operate as Earth stations?
D, Delta.
Yeah,
Delta.
any station is eligible. Any amateur station subject to the privileges of the class of operator license. All right. Volunteer examiner program. When you get your extra class license, and you will, I hope you'll give some thought to giving back to the hobby and maybe as serving as a volunteer examiner. So the volunteer examiner coordinator is an organization that's entered into an agreement with the FCC to coordinate amateur license exams. They coordinate exams at least through an entire call district. And they conduct exams for all classes of licenses, and they accredit licensed operator VEs. They administer the exams, and the VEs are accredited by the VECs. So the 2 big ones in this area in the upstate of South Carolina are the American Radio Relay League and the West Carolina Amateur Radio Service. There are 14, when I last checked, volunteer exam coordinators. And this is the point. VECs are the institutions, one of the 14. One of ARRL, W5YI, WESCARS, they're the organizations, the institutions. The volunteer examiners are the people. They're the people that you will meet at a test session, and they have to have at least 3 to sign off on your license results, your exam results. Volunteer examiners ensure that or the VECs ensure that VEs meet all FCC requirements. They must be, VEs must be at least 18 years old. They must have at least a general class license, and that means that they can only then administer technician class exams. Extra class can do all of them. VEs must never have had an amateur license suspended or revoked. They have to have personal integrity, and VEs do not have to be an ARRL member or a member of any particular organization. It is the VECs that coordinate the preparation and administration of exams. The VECs may or may not actually prepare the exams and test forms. Some VECs require the volunteer examiners to do this. VECs cooperate in the development and maintenance of the exam question pool. So every 3 years or so, the question pool for the extra class, for example, is updated. They're already working, the National Council of Volunteer Exam Coordinators is already working on the next question pool. Which questions shall we keep? Which ones shall we add because there's new technologies? Which ones should we modify to make clearer? They're continually working on this. And the URL for the National Council is down there below. All questions on the exams come from a question pool created by the Question Pool Committee, and exams are prepared by selecting questions from the appropriate license class question pool. Exams must be administered by a VE team of at least 3 VEs. Notice the photo there, those are the VEs you want to get, Larry, Curly, and Mo. VE may be considered present if the session is monitored by real-time audio-video link, which is why we can now have testing online. And the 3 VEs must certify, they must sign on your application that an examinee is qualified for the license grant, that they passed, and that they've complied with all the administering VE requirements. Certifying VEs must hold a higher class of license than the elements administered. Each administering VE is responsible for exam supervision and conduct, so each and every volunteer examiner is held responsible. VEs cannot administer exams to close relatives, and if a VE has fraudulently administered or certified an exam, the VE can lose their station license and suspension of operator privileges. The FCC can do that. If a candidate fails to comply with a volunteer examiner's instructions, the rule is that the exam should be immediately terminated. So if a volunteer examiner tells you to sit down, please sit down. Otherwise, your exam will be terminated. Exam passing score is 74% or better. And if an applicant fails to pass their exam, the VEs return the application documentation to the examinee. Volunteer examiners send the test results and successful license applications to the VEC, who then reviews them for accuracy, and subsequently the VEC forwards new license and upgrade documentation to the FCC for processing. It maybe has changed now. It used to be that Westcars was doing all their work via email and electronic filing, and you could take a test on a Saturday and have your new license by Monday. Whereas some were still using the US mails, and it was taking a week or two for the same process to be. So it's worth asking. You know, how do you submit it? When would I expect to see my license? Although, for those of us who are old enough, I waited 6 months for my first license when I took an exam for the novice license back in about 1969. It was 6 months or 6 weeks, but it was a long time. It was a long time. So we got it good now. You can't complain. VECs may charge you for the costs necessary to administer the exam, the administrative costs. $10 maybe. Some exam sessions are still free. So if that's you can search them out. All right, here we go for questions. For which types of out-of-pocket expenses do the Part 97 rules state that VEs and VECs may be reimbursed?
A alpha.
Alpha.
Yeah, the administrative stuff, preparing, processing, administering, and coordinating. So who is tasked with maintaining the pools of questions for all U.S. amateur license exams?
B. Charlie.
Charlie.
Yeah, the VECs do it, the 14 of them, yep, that make up the National Council. And what is a volunteer examiner coordinator?
C. Charlie.
Charlie.
Yeah, see, the VECs are organizations that have entered into an agreement with the FCC. And what is required to be accredited as a volunteer examiner?
Delta.
Yeah, the VEC, the organization, must confirm that the individual meets FCC requirements to serve. And what must the VE team do with the application form if the examinee does not pass the exam?
Bravo.
Yep, return the documents to the examinee. Yep. So who is responsible for the proper conduct and necessary supervision during an amateur operator license exam session?
Alpha. Charlie.
Charlie, each and every one of the VEs is personally held responsible. Yeah. And what should a VE do if a candidate fails to comply with the examiner's instructions?
Bravo.
Bravo.
Yeah, immediately terminate the candidate's examination. That's the rule. So, to which of the following examinees may a VE not administer an exam?
D. Charlie.
Charlie.
Yeah, relatives of the VE as listed in the FCC rules. And what may be the penalty for a VE who fraudulently administers or certifies an exam?
Alpha.
Alpha.
Yeah, they can lose their station and operator licenses. And what must the administering VEs do after the administration of a successful exam?
Charlie.
Yeah, they send the results to their VEC and then it goes on to the FCC from there. And what must the VE team do if an examinee scores a passing grade on all examination elements needed for an upgrade or new license?
Bravo.
Yeah, so three VEs, three individuals must certify, they do that by signing the form, that the examinee is qualified for the license grant and that they have complied with all of the VE requirements. All right, this has been a lot of mishmash, I told you, but here's miscellaneous rules, which is even more of a potpourri. So here we go. Auxiliary stations. This is kind of a confusing one. Auxiliary stations are stations that transmit point to point within a system of cooperating amateur stations. Auxiliary stations can be established by techs, generals, advanced, or extra, not by novices. Typically it includes links to relay audio or control signals from one repeater to another, for example. Another example of an auxiliary station is if you buy a mobile radio that has cross-band repeat capabilities. A lot of the new ones do. You could transmit to your car from an HT on one band and have it retransmitted out to a repeater at a distant location. That would be a cross-band mobile rig repeater that's also an auxiliary station. That's what I like to think of it with auxiliary stations. A lot of repeaters also will have remote receivers. That maybe they have because of the antenna pattern, they have a null in one area, so they might put up a special receiver just to receive signals coming from a particular area. That also is an auxiliary station. Control operators of auxiliary stations, let me just put it this way, cannot be novice class holders. They can be technician, general, advanced, or extra. Auxiliary stations are permitted on the 2-meter band and above. Power amplifiers. Amplifiers below 144 megahertz may require FCC certification and must meet standards. Amateurs building their own amplifiers do not need to have their amplifiers certified by a laboratory, but they still must meet these requirements as far as spurious emissions. Certified amplifiers, those that are sold commercially, must meet spurious emission standards, minus 43 dB down from the carrier, when tested at 1500 watts or whatever the full power of the amplifier is. And there's a restriction, they must have no more than 15 dB of gain. Dealers, amateur radio dealers, may normally only sell certified amplifiers, but are permitted to sell homemade amplifiers if they were purchased used and resold then again to another amateur radio operator. So that's more than you ever really needed to know about linear amplifiers. When I used to live in Michigan, this impacted me. There are two lines up there, line A and line B. Line A is an imaginary line parallel to and south of the U.S.-Canadian border in the United States. And U.S. stations north of this line may not transmit between 420 and 430 megahertz. And I used to live in Midland, Michigan, which is right about there. It was on the eastern side of line A. So this restriction was such that we could not transmit between 420 and 430 because Canada uses that segment for some of its fixed and mobile services. Certain U.S. cities may also have land mobile service and government services in that band segment. We're sharing the band, so we must not interfere with them. Here's a little closer view of that line A. There is an area in the United States called the National Radio Quiet Zone. It's where the National Radio Astronomy Observatory is located. It's in an area near Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia. And special permission is required for beacons or stations in that area. And if you go into that area, you will actually see signs on the road that say no radio transmission for the next 10 miles. Business and payment. No amateur transmissions are permitted in which you or your employer have a pecuniary interest, money interest. Personal activities don't count as business, so you could sell ham radio equipment by talking to somebody over the air. I've been told you could actually make an order from another business for your own personal use using ham radio. But can you make communications on behalf of a nonprofit organization? No, that would be considered carrying message traffic that other commercial entities could do. Spread spectrum. You have spread spectrum in your house, I'm pretty sure. If you got Wi-Fi, that's spread spectrum. It's a signal transmission technique in which the modulation scheme spreads the signal over a wide bandwidth. And it's used to minimize interference, excuse me, and it allows multiple stations to utilize the same band. So for amateurs, spread spectrum operation may be used above 222 megahertz with a power output of up to 10 watts. Only where regulated by the FCC, here in the United States, for example, or in a country that permits spread spectrum emissions. It cannot cause harmful interference, and it cannot be used to obscure the meaning. So monitoring stations should be able to figure out what you're doing and negotiate the spread spectrum. Commercial Wi-Fi systems use a standard scheme. If you want to operate outside the United States, you must have the permission of the host government. Now, sometimes that's been handled already ahead of time by treaty. So the European Conference of Posts and Telecommunications, which in French is abbreviated CEPT. There is the International Amateur Radio Permit for Central and South America. And then there's something called the ITU Reciprocal Permit. This allows licensed U.S. amateurs to operate in these regions. So U.S. hams can travel and operate from most European countries using CEPT rules. The IARP, you can operate in Central and South America. And where those two don't apply, then sometimes the ITU Reciprocal Permit is functional. CEPT is the one that I'm most familiar with, but you can go to the ARRL's website and find out more specifics. But with CEPT, going to Europe, these are the three things you want to bring along with: your FCC license, your passport, and print out the FCC Form DA 161048. What? It's this. It's a translation in English, German, and French that says that you're a licensed amateur radio operator, that you're licensed to operate in the United States, and by treaty convention you are also authorized to operate in the host country in the European Union. So here's more information on that. Foreign hams coming to the United States, full privilege hams may operate here as if they were extra class operators. Canadians can operate to the extent of their license, but not in excess of our extra class license. They have some frequency privileges in different areas that we do not have. And if you're into testing or trying out new things, like for example the 2200 meter band or the 630 meter band. Those were special bands, and in order to operate there you had to get special temporary authority, in our case from the FCC. And the FCC will look at your technical proposal and they will give you, okay, yes, you can do this, and you may get a new call sign to operate in using the special temporary authority. I found it interesting because on YouTube, I don't know if you've seen this guy, Callum, of the DX Commander. He was testing high power AM radio antennas that he was going to be selling worldwide. But back then, Ofcom, which is the British FCC, had a limit of 400 watts for amateurs in Great Britain. But he needed to test at 1,500 watts. So he went to Ofcom and got special temporary authority to operate at the full US legal limit of 1,500 watts so that he could test his products, and he got a special call sign in order to do that. I think they've since raised their limit up to 1,000 watts, but it's interesting that special temporary authority exists in other countries as well. All right, last group of questions. What must the control operator of a repeater operating in the 70 centimeter band do if a radio location system experiences interference from that repeater?
Charlie,
Yeah, if you're creating interference, you've got to cease operation and make changes so that you don't do that. What is the National Radio Quiet Zone?
A alpha,
C, Charlie.
C, Charlie, an area
Charlie.
surrounding the National Radio Astronomy Observatory. And which of the following apply to communications transmitted to amateur stations in foreign countries? When you're DXing, what
C,
kind
Charlie.
the conversations you should have are communications limited to those incidental to the purpose of the service and remarks of a personal nature. Excuse me. What is an IARP?
A, alpha.
Yeah, it's an
Alpha.
agreement, a treaty that allows U.S. amateurs to operate in Central and South America, certain regions. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Which of the following is required in order to operate in accordance with CEPT?
C, Charlie.
Yeah, you have to have that translation, that copy of DA 16-1048. Somebody else has got a cough. And which of the following operating agreements allow an FCC licensed U.S. citizen to operate in many European countries?
Delta.
A, alpha.
A alpha deals with Europe. Remember, that's the French abbreviation, CEPT. On what frequencies are spread spectrum transmissions permitted by amateurs?
B, bravo.
Yes, above 222, above 222 megahertz. And what privileges are authorized in the U.S. to persons holding an amateur service license granted by the Government of Canada?
C, Charlie.
Charlie.
Yeah, the operating terms and conditions of their Canadian amateur service license not to exceed U.S. amateur extra class license privileges. And under what circumstances may a dealer sell an external RF power amplifier capable of operation below 144 megahertz if it's not been granted FCC certification?
Delta.
Yes, the amplifier is constructed or modified by an amateur operator for use at an amateur station. And which of the following geographic descriptions approximately describes line A?
Alpha.
Yeah, that's that line roughly parallel to and south of the border between the U.S. and Canada. And amateur stations may not transmit in which of the following frequency segments if they are located in the contiguous 48 states and north of line A?
Delta.
Yeah, that 420 to 430. Under what circumstances might the FCC issue a special temporary authority to an amateur station?
Beta.
Okay,
To provide for
Alpha.
experimental amateur communications. And when may an amateur station send a message to a business?
C.
Think of pecuniary, when
Delta.
neither the amateur or their employer has a pecuniary interest in the communications. That comes from the 1934 Communications Act. And which of the following types of amateur station communications are prohibited?
A alpha.
Alpha,
Yeah, you can't do things that could be done commercially. So communications transmitted for hire, for example. And who may be the control operator of an auxiliary station?
B.
Yeah, not
Bravo.
novices. Anybody else? Technicians, generals, advanced, or extra? All right. Which of the following best describes one of the standards that must be met by an external RF power amplifier if it is to qualify for a grant of FCC certification?
D delta.
It must satisfy the FCC's spurious emission standards, minus 43 dB, when operated at the lesser of 1,500 watts or its full output power. And ladies and gentlemen, you made it. You made it to the end of Chapter 3. I'm so proud of you. So let's get up, let's stretch, let's move around, and come back in 5 minutes. And Dave will tell us how to learn better.
greetings. It's good to be back with you again. This is the third of three follow-on sessions that I've done with Gary as we've gone through chapters 1, 2, and 3. And one of the main reasons for these preparatory segments is to get ready for chapter 4, which we're going to be starting next week. So I think this will be good for you. Okay, well, tonight's little session is called Learning How to Learn, as you can see on the screen there. Or Gary likes to call it learning how to learn better. So you probably never had a class like this in school, but maybe you should have. If you think of all the things you've had to do in the past, nobody really covered this information, and it's something that might have been useful. So I'll comment briefly. I sent out some handouts this past week on Saturday. The full reference sheet tutorial was included. There were 2 additional step-by-step guides for problems we'll be solving in Chapter 4 on inductive and capacitive reactance. And we won't be talking about those tonight, but I wanted to send them out so you'd have a chance to try, first of all, reading them and try working the problems on your own before we get to Chapter 4 next week. I think from what we covered, you'll be able to do it if you follow the step-by-step guides. And
they're also in the Dropbox folder for this chapter. So there is a link in the description box on YouTube right now, and in the emails we'll send out tomorrow. So if you didn't get the handouts because of timing, because of the emails and whatnot, they'll be available to you there.
Yep. Please get those and have them ready for next week. Now, those of you that went through the general class with us, I use this Learning How to Learn module for both the general and the extra, but it's always being improved. So even if you've seen this before, if you were in our general class, pay attention tonight because there's some new stuff here. So why would you have some desire to pay attention? Well, for those of you that would like to get 100% on your exam, some of this material will be very useful for you and also be useful in your continuing ham radio career, as I like to call it. I'll just whet your appetite. Just take a quick picture at the calculator cam here. And here we have a tomato. This is actually a timer, and we're going to talk about how to use that a little bit. But I'll have you pondering what that's all about before we get there. Some suspense. Barbara Oakley, if you could go to unspotlight me for a minute so I can see everybody. How many of you had a chance to look at the Barbara Oakley video? I sent that out in the handout. Just wave your hand. A couple of you did. Okay. That you're going to find that to be fairly useful because it's a good overview. You get a little sense of her personality as well. Okay, so back to the presentation. One of Barbara's comments, learning how to learn is the most important and most powerful tool you can ever grasp. So we want to consider what things really work to be an effective learner and what things don't work. And if we've got 602 questions to consider for the amateur extra in the pool, it'd be good to have some tools and techniques to be able to help understand and remember it all. This information is also good for people in your orbit. What I mean by that is your friends, your family, your kids, your grandkids, your spouse. These are tools that if you think about it, you can probably say, boy, such and such could really use this, so you can share it. So credit where credit is due. I first got turned on to some of this stuff during a forum that Michael Burnett put on in Hamcation about 6 years ago. I was in Florida, and I think the title of his forum was How to Pass Your Ham Exam on the First Try. And he used a lot of the material from Barbara Oakley in this book that's shown here, A Mind for Numbers. And the rest of the title is How to Excel at Math and Science Even If You Flunked Algebra. So that's kind of an intriguing title for a book. Right here. So here's an Amazon link if you want to dig a little bit further. It's available, and you can tell when I really like a book because I usually have it in all formats: Kindle, Audible, an audiobook, and the paper book. So if you want to dig further, it's there at this link. There's also, I don't know if you've ever heard of a MOOC, M-O-O-C. It's a massive open online course, and some of the major universities have these. And there is actually a course on learning how to learn that Barbara puts on. I actually took it, and it's free, so I put the link here if you care to dig a little deeper there. However, there's a little easier reference. The one that I showed here is what I call the adult version. This is the kids version, written for kids and teens, and this one is a lot more fun. So if you're interested in digging a little bit further and you're going to only buy one, I'd recommend this one. So it's a simplified version. It's very rich in metaphors and pictures. The Kindle version is also in full color, which makes it even more entertaining. And it's excellent content for what we need to learn in the extra class. So just a recommendation for you there. One more resource. I had a grandson that entered the nuclear program in the U.S. Navy, and there were a lot of things that they needed to learn, and I had recommended this book for him, which is another version of some of the same material, Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. This was a book that Barbara recommended as well. So just some resources there if you care to dig further. Now most of you are interested in passing your extra class, and you're not that interested in learning about brain science, but I kind of got turned on by this because it was so applicable to what we needed to learn. So I wanted to offer the resources. All right, Houston, we've got a problem. This is a really serious problem. Let's take a little look at what we're seeing here, the forgetting curve. This has been studied extensively for probably 100 years or more. Let's see what we got here. We got a brain here, and it looks like it's filling up, not quite completely full, retention. So how much do we retain? When you learn something new, the first time you hear it, you're at about 100%, because you just heard it, right? Well, what happens one day later? Okay, days across the bottom, percent retention on the vertical axis here. One day later, let's go up here, we're at about 50%. What that means is that if you heard and understood everything that Gary had to share with you tonight, tomorrow at least half of it's going to be gone. That's kind of scary, isn't it? You want to pass your test with 100%? Well, let's see what happens. 7 days later, if you don't do anything, you're down to about 10%. So how in the world are you going to pass your exam if you're forgetting at this rate? It's pretty dismal. We've got about 13 weeks left of our class. So how are we going to do it? So with some analogies are a very powerful way to learn things, hook new information onto something that you already understand. So here's a couple of them. Learning, it's with the forgetting curve, it's trying to string cranberries without a knot. A long time ago, they used to make Christmas decorations by taking a needle and a thread and stringing cranberries onto the thread. Well, if you don't have a knot on the end of the thread, the cranberries are just going to fall off. Or it's like pouring water into a leaky bucket. Look at this poor bucket here. Short little arms. The poor bucket can't possibly plug up the holes. The water's coming in, it's leaking out all over the place. This is like the new information that you're learning. The bucket is not very happy. The bucket is like your brain. So another analogy here, the magic plant analogy. I like pineapple, so I picked that as a fruit. Favorite fruit. And let's imagine, now it takes longer than 16 weeks to produce a pineapple, but stay with me. Our magic plant will produce in 16 weeks. It needs 11 gallons of water over that time, spread evenly over the 16 weeks. And we're going to start out with 11 gallons, but unfortunately, we have a leaky bucket. So what would that be an analogy of? Got all of this silly stuff over here? Well, passing our exam is the fruit, 16 weeks. The amount of knowledge needed is the water, I said 11 gallons. Well, we got 11 chapters in our book. The problem is our learning is leaking. So what can we do? Any ideas out there in class land? What are some things we could do to combat this problem?
Well, you have to have repetition. You have to keep revisiting. I know when I need to learn something, I have to keep revisiting it.
And I call that refilling the bucket. Yep, it's a technique called spaced repetition. And that helps to plug the leaks. We had one student in a past class said, well, maybe if I learn really fast, it would help. I don't think that would do it, but we want to pass our test. So
something that I do, if there's, like when I was trying to learn the phonetic alphabet a long time ago, I printed it out and posted it next to my desk where I would see it over and over and over again.
Yep, that's that repetition again. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. So what can we do? Well, I don't know if tying a string on your finger would help or not, but that's what some people do. So what we have to do fundamentally is to interrupt the forgetting process, because there's not any real way to beat that. That's just built into us. So we've got to interrupt the forgetting process. We have to refresh the learning, as was mentioned, plug the leaks, and relearn where needed. There's strategies that work, and there's strategies that are not effective. And what's interesting is the vast majority of people are using strategies that are not effective. So we're going to talk about both of them. So spaced repetition is one. We saw the forgetting curve and what was happening over time. These curves don't all match necessarily, but look what happens. A day later, okay, when we're down to the 50% level, if you can review that material, you bounce back up again. And by spacing out this repetition, you can keep that retention high. Notice something else that's going on here. You don't have to do it every single day. For the first, repeating one day is fine, and then maybe 3 days, and then maybe 6 days. So periodically refreshing that information will keep it there. Make it available for you to grasp. So there's something else happens between now and day one, and that's that you'll sleep. Sleep is something that, the sleep is our friend, because what happens during the night when you're sleeping, your brain is continuing to process the information and storing it, and at the same time clearing out the junk that's there. So sleep is your friend. Memory consolidation, wash out useless stuff, and we notice that less refresh is needed over time. We'll talk about spaced repetition, sleep on it, and then recall. And this is what you want, a solid brick wall of learning. Okay? Not this. This is an unhappy wall. How do we get something that looks like this? Well, cramming is one way. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a class, I'm thinking college, where you goof off all semester, and then Gary's nodding his head.
Go ahead, call me out.
Yeah, got him. But then you cram, the night before the exam, and maybe you pass. That is somewhat effective, but you've got this kind of a mess. You won't be able to retain it long term. And the grandson that I mentioned that went into the nuclear program, his instructors were telling the students that they should cram before the unit tests. And they were doing that, but what was happening was the students were not passing their comprehensive because it turned to mush. It didn't go into long-term memory. So real concrete takes probably 24 to 48 hours to set, and maybe up to 7 days to be at most of its compression strength. And of course, cramming, you don't give it that chance. So strategies that work. First of all, I wanted this picture of me and you. See, I am perfectly organized, sending accurate information, but what's getting into your brain looks over here. Of course, I'm being silly. I can't take credit for being being the perfect instructor, but this is what happens in any learning environment. You need to get what you're hearing into some form in your head that will sort it out and help it to make sense. Handwritten notes are very, very good at that, because when you're listening to a lecture, for example, if you're taking handwritten notes, you can't possibly transcribe every word that's being spoken. So what you have to do is paraphrase. Okay, what did Dave just say? Okay, and then write down a few words that will remind you of that. So it causes you to organize what you're listening and regurgitate that into a form that hopefully will help you. And the other thing about handwriting, it's much slower than your rate of listening. So it slows you down. So you have to summarize. So restate the main points in your own words. This is helpful. Create analogies that make sense to you. We've been looking at all kinds of analogies tonight. Analogies are like memory hooks. You take something that you already know and attach something new to it, and that helps you to remember it. Memory mnemonics and cues. You may have noticed in the reference guide, the extra class reference guide, I'll try not to call it the general class reference guide tonight, had something in it called Eli the Iceman. Kind of a silly little phrase, but that's an example of a mnemonic device that will help you figure out voltage and current and leading and lagging phase angles that we'll be getting into next week. Spaced repetition, we kind of looked at that over here. In self-testing, Barbara and some of her material talked about a test as being a big scary bear. You think of having to take a test like your extra class exam, and that's really scary. Am I going to pass that? But there's a different way to look at tests. If you can use self-testing where the stakes are not high, nothing bad is going to happen to you if you take a practice test and don't do well on it. That will give you it'll reinforce what you do know, and it will allow you to identify the areas where you need to spend a little bit more time. So self-testing is great because it forces you to recall information, and it's low pressure. And you have to accept that permanent learning takes time. We see that over here in the spaced repetition. The idea of the concrete setting takes a while for it to cure. And I circled the areas that are particularly important: the spaced repetition, self-testing, and giving yourself the time. Don't be frustrated if something doesn't come right away. It takes a little time, a couple of times through sometimes, to get some of this stuff. Another analogy that I really like is a deer path analogy. Here we've got a deer, and deer have to eat. So when they find food in the forest, they store away where they went to get that food or get that drink or whatever. So we've got short-term memory and recall, we've got the forest, and then long-term memory. I don't think deer read books, but you get the idea of the knowledge being out there someplace. Now think of this: every time the deer makes another trip through the forest to get the information and comes back again, that path gets worn a little bit deeper in the woods. And we have in the brain something called memory traces. And the more times you retrieve information, self-testing for example, the stronger that memory trace becomes. And it helps you to remember. So for us, we need to focus, we need to repeat, and then time to recall, or spaced repetition. I think Barbara in her book uses a mouse running through the forest. I like deer better. So again, just reviewing, these are the strategies that can work. We're going to take a look at the ARRL exam review site. Just before we do that though, I want to make mention of this resource. I think it came up earlier in our class series a week or two ago. there's a resource called the Extra Q&A book, and what it has in it is each of the 602 questions in the pool, all in order of pool question order, so that if you're taking a practice test and you get something wrong, you can look it up in this book and not only see what the right answer is, but also get a brief explanation of why that was the right answer. We had a student, in fact, let me grab mine here just a second. I thought I had this out. All right, I apologize for the delay there, but here's a picture of the book. Let me zoom out a little bit. And you'll notice that it has these little flags on it. So we had one student that was using this to help learn some of this material, or retain it, and came up with this technique. Every time he got a question wrong, he'd put a little Post-it flag on it. And then what he would do was he worked to eliminate the flags. So it helped him to focus on the things that were needed to fix those deficiencies. So this is a resource that can be helpful when you're taking practice tests. Jump back here. And what I'd like to do now is take a quick look at the ARRL exam review site. Okay, how are you going to do that spaced repetition? Well, Gary has already recommended that you go out and get an account at the exam review site. So we'll have a look at that here. Hopefully it'll come up for us. I think we have internet here. Okay, here we go. Drag that over so you can see it. So when you click on that link, it'll take you to this page here. If you don't already have an account, you can create an account here. Now this is free. You don't have to be an ARRL member in order to use this resource. So I'm going to go ahead and log on. I won't show you my password because you might use it to get into my bank account.
Yeah.
Okay, and the first thing that comes up is this. We want to practice. Well, there's three options. Review for exam, which is what we want to do. We don't want to take a practice exam. It'll actually create a practice exam with 50 questions, but we haven't been through hardly any of the material yet. Last week and this week, some pool questions. But you're not ready for this yet. You're welcome to try that if you want, but it'll be discouraging. And I don't know if anybody that would want to print a practice exam, but that's an option. So we'd want to review for exam, and we're working on the extra. And look at the options here. We can review by chapter or sub-element and see how we're doing over time. So since the book is organized by chapter, not by sub-elements, we review by chapter. Now you can select everything. That gets you all of the chapters. You don't want to do that. Let's just consider what Gary covered tonight, Chapter 3, Rules and Regulations. And look at the option you've got here. Either you can select all to review all of the questions in the chapter, or you can select individual ones. For our purposes, we're going to say select all, and then review. And here we have a question. It says 1 of 68, right?
65.
65, okay. So it's going to go through all 65 questions that Gary covered tonight. And tomorrow would be a great time to do this. Remember our spaced repetition? Do this 1 day later, and then 3 days after that, and so forth to keep it fresh. So let's see what happens. Why is it not legal to transmit a 3 kilohertz bandwidth USB signal with a carrier frequency of 14,348? Anybody remember? I hear a lot of silence. Well,
Read it small.
1 kilohertz above. And A. Oh, what's it?
so A is what you're thinking, huh? Okay. Well, in this case, and I'm glad that we got it wrong for 2 reasons. Number one, it reinforces that that wasn't the answer. And secondly, it'll tell you what the correct answer was. Now, getting things wrong is a great way to learn, because you'll say, oh, I should know better than that. And it motivates you to get that right. So, this is an example of how it works. So let's click Next. When using a transceiver that displays the carrier frequency of a phone signal, which of the following is displayed? What frequency represents the lowest frequency at which properly adjusted LSB will be totally within the band? And that was Delta. Yep.
See that?
Yep. So that we immediately turn green there. So this is how the tool works, and this is the way that you can reinforce what you've learned, make those paths through the forest stronger, and review everything that we've covered so far. So I wanted to demonstrate that. So I'm going to return to the main menu and go ahead and log out. And it'll keep track of your progress if you want to stop midway. So that's the tool. If you haven't signed up for your free account yet, please do that, and please start reviewing between class. We'll go back to the presentation. I've got to turn it back on. There we go. There we go. Good. Okay, there's another resource, and I spent about an hour today playing with this. We've had some of our students tell us that they've had tremendous success using hamstudy.org, and I put a link down for you. It does a lot of the same things that the ARRL testing site that we just looked at, a lot of the things that it does. It also has brief explanations for questions that come up if you're interested in learning a little bit more. So it's kind of a combination of the ARRL study tool and the extra Q&A book all rolled into one. So I wanted to kind of toss that out and let you know that it's there. We've had real good feedback from people that have used this. And if you do decide to play with that, let us know what you think. It's free. They also have an app that will run on either your iPhone or Android that will let you take advantage of all of their resources in an offline mode. I played with that a little bit today too. Really good resource. So let us know what you think of that if you decide to play with it. So let's talk about illusions of competence. Look at this light bulb here. This light bulb is actually kind of clueless. He's all happy because he thinks he knows what's going on, but there really isn't much getting into this part of his head. Okay, so illusions of competence, repeated reading. Some people think if they'll reread a section over and over and over, it'll get it cemented into their brain. But that really doesn't work, because when you read it the first time, that's good. And then if you read it the second time, what you tell yourself is, oh, I've already seen this, and you don't pay attention to it. So it's really not very effective. Some people think if they highlight everything, that'll get it into their brain. There's a lot of physical activity in highlighting, but it really doesn't work. You're getting exercise, but not learning. Logic of classroom explanations. I found this really interesting. We were going through some of the math problems last week, and you might have been following along and even getting it correct on your calculator. So you think, oh man, I've got that. Well, a couple days later, go back and try it and see if you've still got it. So sometimes you think that you're tracking with us in class, but until you do it on your own, it may not be there. Some people will do repeated practice tests before knowing the material. I've got a good friend who, part of the State Guard in South Carolina, they had ham radio equipment in the Guard, but nobody that could operate it. So this fella decided he was going to get his license. So he took practice exams for just about a year, and then passed the technician, general, and extra all in one sitting. But you know what he knew about radio? Nothing, basically. But he did come back and go through our classes. So yeah, doing practice tests without understanding what it is you're looking at is not helpful. So these are all illusions of competence. You think you're learning something and it really isn't getting into long-term memory. We already talked about cramming before a test. So these really don't work well for mastery. Well, what do you mean by mastery? Well, to really own this material. Can you recall it? Well, getting 100% on your test, that's one motivator. And your entire ham radio career, a lot of this stuff will be useful to you over time. So it's worth learning it. So what does work? I'll give you some tips. When you go into a new chapter, like next week, it'll be the first half of chapter 4. Read the chapter recreationally at first. Barbara calls this a picture walk. Look at the captions, look at the bolded text, just get a general feel for what's going on. That's what's meant by reading recreationally, and then you can slow down and go through it again a second time. It's a concept called focus versus diffuse learning. Very, very interesting topic. How does this work? Well, you intensely focus on something for a little bit, then do anything else to disconnect, and the brain will continue to work in diffuse mode. In other words, you're not paying attention to the material at that time, and then you can come back to focus mode later. I'll illustrate that here in just a bit. So have you ever had an aha experience? That's when you're struggling with something and you set it aside or go to bed, get up the next day, and bang, you've got a new insight on how to approach that problem, or you've got the answer. That's called an aha experience, and it kind of demonstrates what's going on here between focus and diffuse. Now I've got something, we were talking about brain science. I don't know if you all knew that you had a pinball machine in your head. For those of you that have never heard of a pinball machine, it was real popular years ago, where you take a plunger here and a steel ball, pull the plunger back, and the ball would shoot all over, and you'd get points depending upon which bumpers were hit. There were flippers down at the bottom, so you could bounce it back up again. So that's a concept of a pinball machine. So when you're stuck on something and you're working in a focused mode, your brain is looking in a very tight area. It's all of the things that you know about that. So that this is focus mode. Now when you set it aside, when you take a nap or stop thinking about it so seriously, your brain continues to work in what's called diffuse mode, and it's ranging all over your brain, accessing information that you needed to solve the problem in an area that you were not looking at in the first case. So here we're very tight, and here we're kind of ranging over your entire mind. And these two modes are mutually exclusive. You can be in the focus mode or the diffuse mode, but not both. So we're going to apply that now. We had our little picture of a tomato before in a technique called the Pomodoro technique. We'll show you how to apply this in a practical way. The way that this works is eliminate distractions. Let's set the timer for 25 minutes. For some people, some soft, gentle music helps, the so-called Mozart effect. You don't want something that'll be distracting. And then blitz, study as hard as you can for those 25 minutes. Now your goal is not to completely learn it, it's just to make progress. Then after 25 minutes, you set your work aside, disconnect completely, leave the area that you're working in, hopefully. Take a walk, exercise, go pet your dog, study an unrelated area, take a nap. These are all ways to transition from the focus mode into the diffuse mode, and then you can come back again. Now, Thomas Edison had a rather interesting technique. He'd sit in his easy chair, and with some ball bearings in his hand and a pie tin on the floor, and when he started dozing off, he'd drop the bearings, which would make noise and wake him up, and sometimes he'd have a new insight into what it was that he was working so hard on. So that's the Thomas Edison technique. Now, I covered this in just a minute or two. There's a really wonderful video. This link will be working when you get the PDF tomorrow, so you can see a bit more about that if you wish to. If you want to buy a tomato on Amazon, they're about $9 to make this work. There's also apps that you can download that do the same thing. And then rinse and repeat. So people often will recommend doing 4 Pomodoros with the little breaks in between, then take about half an hour off, and then come back and do it again. Very effective. Another thing that is magical here, when you think of a big task that you have to accomplish, like learning the extra material, that's scary, or a scary bear, as Barb, it's out there, Barb likes to call it. But doing it in little pieces, well, anybody, so it's real easy to put this off, all right? But if you can, most people can commit to doing 25 minutes. So it's a way to fight procrastination. This helps with that as well. So if you can make links to concepts that you already know, it's very powerful. We talked about analogies. So related knowledge and analogies are good for you. We talked about the visual, audible, and kinesthetic learner. People usually have a preference, but they don't necessarily learn best in one of those. So try all 3 if you possibly can. Engage all possible senses. For pineapple, what did it smell like? What did it taste like? Those all affect the brain in a way that makes the information memorable. Tell yourself a story, write a concept, teach it to another person. I don't know much about Trotman, but I love this quote. He said, "Thoughts disentangle themselves when they pass through the lips and the fingertips." The handwritten notes that we were talking about before, that's passing through the fingertips. And if you try to teach some of this to somebody else, that's passing through the lips. So thoughts disentangle themselves when they pass through the lips and the fingertips. I thought that was a great quote. Then I've got the next one coming up is from a fairly smart guy. I think you've probably heard of him, Albert Einstein. Said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Well, that's something that Gary and I try our best to do. In some academic disciplines, students are told this complex physics stuff that you're doing, try to explain the concept so that a 3rd grader could understand it. That tests this. How well do you understand it? Can you get it down to that level? Some problem-solving techniques. We're going to be seeing some pool questions next week that they're going to sound scary at first. So the technique is to try to recall from memory, try to work the problem without the crutches that go along with the step-by-step, so to speak. So read the question, discern what it is asking. Are they looking for voltage or current or power? What is it they're asking for? Then recall what you know about it. Was there a formula on the extra class reference sheet that talked about that? It can really help to draw a diagram, and then try from memory to recall how to solve it and solve it. Now, if you get stuck, go ahead and use the references to get you out of the ditch, and then come back later and attempt to solve it without the helps. And this will help reinforce it. Again, Barb said, learning how to learn is the most powerful tool you can ever grasp. I totally agree with that. And some of these principles will be a big help in learning the extra material. Now back to our friend, Michael Burnett. He's the fellow that did the forum at Hamcation that I talked about. This was his list. He also has a series of books on learning about how to pass tests. There's about 4 or 5 different tracks you can go. Gordon West has one, and of course there's the ARRL book that we use, and there's 2 or 3 other ones. This was his. But at any rate, these were the tips that he shared that are, they resonate with me. They're consistent with what we talked about tonight. Commit to a date and stick to it. Well, get your extra class exam scheduled for December, if you can. Make a study schedule and stick to it. Study with a friend if you can. Might be hard in an online class, but the emails we share, and we've got the Discord server that Gary told us about. Read and recall, engage lots of senses. Learn the material first, then do the practice exams. They can go hand in hand. Build your own context if possible. Make your own analogies. Take breaks. We saw that in the Pomodoro technique and the spaced repetition. Learn more than necessary. You're going to have, excuse me, some topics that will still have you scratching your head. Well, Google is your friend. You can go as far as you want on any of this stuff that we're going to be sharing, and that'll help you when you come back to do the learn just what you need to know. Explain material to other people. Don't put off the hard stuff, and then get a good night's solid sleep before the exam. And Michael's comment, and Barb, I think, said this in her book as well, if you neglect number 11, the other 10 may not matter. You really need to be fresh when you go to take your test. So I hope that some of this stuff is useful. And next week, we're going to have more fun, more happy people. We saw happy people at the end of the first class, and we're going to have all kinds of fun next week. Chapter 4 is, a lot of people are really scared when they look at that, but we're going to help you through it. So for next week, well, first of all, go over the handouts that I sent on Saturday, help you get ready for Chapter 4. Then read Chapter 4 recreationally through page 427. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that you don't need, so don't be frightened of any of the stuff that you see there. We're going to tell you what you actually need to know during the class. I'll be sending out an email with the notes on how to get ready for Chapter 4. I'll be sharing some links from Dave Kassler, who is an engineer. Sometimes he kind of gets off the deep end on some stuff, but if you're an ARRL member and you can access their learning center, very good insights into what we're going to be talking about. So that's where we're going. So watch for an email from me, and we're going to be in Chapter 4 next week. Okay, so at this point, we've got about 1 minute left. Gary, if you want to do your class chat thing, or...
Well, yeah, we got maybe a minute or so. Any questions or comments? Marshall says, great class, thank you, I appreciate that.
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Talking about restrictions, do you know of any restrictions in regard to Indian reservations?
No.
For what, operating radios there, or?
Right, yeah, to set up a station on a reservation.
You'd have to have permission of the landowner, of course, but I don't know of anything else. So I can't help you with that one, I guess.
That have to be through the tribal council or leadership or whatever.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, you don't want to get shot, being on private property.
I've never had that question before.
No,
I've never even
that's interesting.
considered it.
Yeah.
Gary, I have a question for you to ponder.
Yes, please.
I am wanting to get a special call sign for a museum that will be permanently assigned to the museum. I need to know how to go about that.
So you're going to want to start a club, and the club is going to have at least, I think it's 3 members, or is it 4 members? And then you can associate this club with the museum, and the trustee of the club can then apply for a club call sign. But you can't assign a call sign to a building.
Okay.
Okay.
But you can create your own club.
All right.
Yeah, you and your wife and your dog and your cat, I suppose. I think they'd have to be licensed members. All right, anything else? If
We're
not,
out of time.
Yep, we'll
Thank you, guys.
We'll close at this point and back next week
Thanks,
for more fun.
73. See you next week.
73, y'all.
Yep.
Ciao.
Bye.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.